Okay, hello everybody. We're about to talk about how to promote well-being in your organization. If that's not the session you are planning to attend, welcome as well. And you're also free to leave if you are in the wrong session. Very difficult in Perugia here, right? With so many rooms. My name is Cabra, and here we have Emma Thomasson. Hello, Emma.
Hi, everybody.
And we both work for the self-investigation. I'm the executive director, and Emma is one of our lead trainers, and she does a lot of things, coaching and many more things. Let us tell you a little bit about who we are, in case you didn't read the full program that you have there with the bios. I've been a journalist for over 20 years, and I used to be an investigative journalist. There you see me with the short hair. About 10 years ago, actually, working in the Panama Papers. You might remember this investigation. Oi, I'm trying to do the nice thing, but it's not working. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. You know, so used to online presentations that now I'm super clumsy with live presentations. So anyway, I was saying I used to work as an investigative journalist. There in the photo, you see me as the head of the Data and Technology Department at the ICIJ, leading the Panama Papers team of 400 reporters. At that time, I was at one of the best times in my professional life, being part of a Pulitzer Prize-winning team that made history on how we do investigative journalism across borders. And at the same time, even though you might see me in that photo, if you can recognize me, I think I'm the smiliest person in the photo, in the first row, short hair. In the center. I was at the top of my career professionally in my early 30s, winning a Pulitzer Prize. And at the same time, I was at one of the lowest points in my life, in my personal life, because I had burnt out. I burnt out and I quit my job a few months after we won the Pulitzer Prize, and I have not come back to active journalism since then. So burnout has shaped my life. The Pulitzer and the Panama Papers changed my life in so many ways. And because I was privileged enough to take time to recover, and I see that burnout is such a systemic issue in our industry, I now dedicate my energy to prevent you, if you're journalists or other media professionals, burning out. And that's a little bit about me, and what about you, Emma?
Yeah, so Mar showed her happy face picture, so here's mine. On this side, this is probably the highlight of my career when I was in South Africa. In the late 1990s, covering Nelson Mandela's presidency. I was in Cape Town in the sun with my notebook. This is prior to the invention of the mobile phone as well, so that made me particularly happy because, you know, we were free from digital distractions. We could just be reporters and be out and about. The picture of me on the right is after a very long career at Reuters as a correspondent and a bureau chief. I ended up in Berlin, so I'm originally from the UK, but I've lived in Germany for many years now. So this is the Reuters newsroom in Berlin. In front of the screen, you know, kind of not out in the sunshine anymore, not meeting people anymore, apart from, you know, my colleagues, until the pandemic came, and definitely the world shrinking. And like Mar, about 10 years ago, I also suffered from a burnout. We're going to hear a little bit more about sort of the reasons for that, but for me it wasn't so much you know, the work, but it was the moving around the world, it was having small kids, it was trying to do too much all at once. So yeah, and I've recovered from that, left Reuters 3 years ago, and now working with Mar at the self-investigation, also dedicated to this issue, and yeah.
And you also do other work, like you're a peer supporter. You would
yeah,
like to
I
elaborate
wanted
on
to
that?
give a shout out to the German peer support helpline. So I've got a card here, and there are people in the room who.
So who are you? Who are you? Can you raise your hand, Malta?
There's Malta Werner at the back, and another of my peer support colleagues in the German helpline. Yeah, so I do that as well, and I'm also working as a consultant with media organizations on the topic of leadership, which we'll come on to.
Right, so Emma and I here are talking about mental health because we're experts by experience. But the reason why we do what we do is because we realized mental health challenges, we were not the only ones dealing with mental health challenges in the media profession. Mental health in journalism is an urgent issue, and unfortunately is an issue that we don't tackle urgently enough. We're very distracted with AI right now, and this makes sense, but as we always say, we need to take care of AI and also of EI, right, of emotional intelligence. So we're here to talk about how to do that. And as a start, we wanted to share some statistics to show how much of a wide problem this is, right? So it's not just Emma's story, it's not my story only. There are thousands of journalists struggling around the world. There's no one unified global study on the mental health state of journalists and media professionals, but whenever we look at studies done at a country level, and here we're looking at data from Canada, Ecuador, and Spain, which are three different media freedom environments, we're seeing high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression, and high levels of burnout and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And people ask me, is this more or less than the general population? There are no studies that look at that to give a precise answer. However, countries that have looked into this, like Portugal, see that journalists are more stressed than nurses, for example, and more burned out than nurses as a way of comparison. And whenever we've seen like studies, country after country, the same picture is repeated. Here are some statistics from the US with the state of mind of local journalists. Local journalism in the US is hurting, we know that. The mental health of local journalists as well. 70 to 72% of local journalists in the US are experiencing moderate to high levels of personal and work-related burnout, according to this study. And we're not going to show all the statistics from around the world, but believe me, if there's a study in your country, it shows a very similar picture. I was even in a conversation recently about Colombia, which is a country with a lot of history of violence, and journalists have been exposed to a lot of violence. And among the topics that they highlighted for their challenges for mental health was not so much violence and the contents they dealt with, it was actually the workplace. It was actually the way we do journalism, the pressures of journalism, and so on. So we're mostly going to concentrate on that in today's conversation. And especially because when we look at studies by, big consulting firms and the references in the world doing research like McKinsey, what we're seeing is that employees who work in a toxic environment are 8 times more likely to experience burnout symptoms, right? And this is not about journalism, but could totally apply to journalism. And probably that's why you're here, right? Because we're going to be talking about how can we change an industry, how can we start changing the toxic environment that we have in many of our companies by working directly inside the media companies. And that's what we do at the Self-Investigation, which is the organization that we work for. We work directly with journalists and media companies from around the world since the beginning of the pandemic, supporting them individually, but also working directly with media companies so that we can create mentally healthy workplaces and do our work that is more needed today than ever. We also produce resources like this toolkit, which has a lot of individual tips and tips for managers. We are not going to talk about individual tips that you can apply for your own self-care today. So if that's what you were expecting, you're more than welcome to leave, although I would suggest you stay. But at least look at that. And if you're a manager, even though this toolkit is for fact checkers, feel free to look at it there because I think it's going to be useful to you as well. And then what we do at the Self-Investigation is also creating general awareness and building bridges and community, not only by coming to these festivals, for example, and journalism conference, also creating our own summit, which you're more than welcome to join. It's happening October 8th to 10th. It's online. It has a ticket, but it's also free for those who cannot afford it. So anybody is welcome. Feel free to register later. But looking back at what we're going to be talking about, let us put the focus on why we're going to be talking about how to promote well-being in the organization and why we're not going to talk so much about trauma or what work correspondents experience when they go to difficult situations. We're going to talk about the workplace, Emma.
Yeah, so I think, the internet, Instagram is full of tips about self-care. And I think when we're talking about mental health and well-being, a lot of pressure is put on the individual to kind of fix themselves, to look after themselves. But if we really want to change the environment in our industry for journalists, we need to think about organizational culture and particularly kind of leadership culture in our organizations. It has to kind of start at the top. And so this is a study actually done in Germany recently, and what are the top 3 reasons for psychological issues among journalists? Number 1 is expectations from managers and newsroom. In other words, the top-down pressure that managers are putting on their staff. And obviously some of that pressure also comes from just the pace of the work and the things that we're covering. Number 2, pace of work. Number 3, work-life balance. And I think that really sort of brings home what I felt when I worked at Reuters, that initially very much of the focus around supporting people within journalism was to do with war correspondents, was to do with people on the front line, was to do with people who'd been exposed to awful violence and terrible, all sorts of crime and conflict. But actually, what the work that we saw at Reuters was that often actually journalists are incredibly resilient in the face of the kind of tough stuff we cover as journalists. That's why we went into the job. But what we struggle with is when the conflict comes into the workplace, when, the manager shouts at you, or when you just have an environment that is not trusting and where people feel safe to kind of speak up. So that's the study. So that's why, obviously I think journalists who have been in war zones, who have faced conflict situations, they need our support. But I think a lot of the support also needs to go to journalists who are working in safe places. Or obviously many journalists are working in safe places, but also covering traumatic content online, fact checkers, and so on. So that's why prevention is so important. A lot can be done to change things before you get to the state that Myanmar were in 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's interesting to understand that we can learn a lot from other professions. So what we do at the Self-Investigation is looking a lot at other professions and leading reports. And I would totally recommend the guidelines by the World Health Organization on mental health at work. They highlight that prevention, focusing on prevention, is one of the key areas, and what they recommend as action number 1, if you only had money for one thing inside your media company, is start by training the managers, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, so some people who are in the room know that I like doing this sketch noting now, so on the plane on the way to Perugia, I thought, how can I put some of this into a visual form? And just thinking about who benefits from well-being in news organizations. Is it just the individual journalist? No, obviously that's what matters to us. But this is really about supporting journalists, managers, teams to create resilient newsrooms. But why are we doing this? Ultimately because we want better journalism, we want better news, we want a healthier business. We want satisfied customers, and really big picture, we want more resilient democracy. So it's not just about benefiting individuals. This is about our business case as well. And I think when we're making these arguments, thinking about all those different stakeholders is important.
And I think that it's very important as well here that we are going to be talking about this collective care that we can have in organizations, and that it's all about the systems that hold us, right? So yes, you can hold yourself, you can take care of yourself, but we need to take care of each other, and we need to our company has a duty of care, or the organizations we work for have a duty of care on our mental health as well. So we're going to turn it to you right now, and even though we discourage multitasking in this talk, we would like to get you to get out your phones out. If you could just scan that QR code and answer some questions, and we're going to show the results anonymously live in a few minutes. And let me stress, this is anonymous, so you can be honest. And this is being live streamed, so if you're watching this live streamed, you can also go to menti.com and enter the code 42423421 and also answer. We'd love to hear about you as well. Okay, so I see everyone in the room has it, so I'm just going to switch. the budget of something there. Great.
Okay, so we can see some results coming in, hopefully, yeah.
Are you having problems with this? You didn't. One question only? With
Question about what action should you take?
Sorry, we did test this.
Oh, the code and the QR code are switched.
Yeah, sorry. So actually, we did test this, but clearly we tested it wrongly. So can you scan this QR code, please? Those who tested,
Oh, you
who did the
can't
QR code. Just hold on.
So
Yeah,
that-
right.
so don't use the
So
num-
don't use the QR code or use these other QR code.
And not the number. They shouldn't
It's
use
it's
that code,
numbers.
'cause that'll take it to the wrong one.
Don't use this code, sorry.
Use the
This is a
QR
mess.
code.
Ignore the QR code, go to menti.com, go to 4242, so I'm deleting this. There's a mistake here.
Yeah. Is it working now? Okay, great.
Thank you, sorry about that.
Okay, we've got lots of editors and managers in the room.
Okay,
You can jump to the next question.
so we're going to be looking into a little bit, right? So we got a lot of editors and managers in the room.
So people are quite good at setting boundaries.
That's your perception, at least.
Well, 3.4, I think out of 5. It's moving a bit. Most people, well, again, what is good?
Right. Well, so what I think it's important is what we're seeing is that, there's room for improvement in the room. About emotional and mental health challenges at work. What we're seeing when we look at statistics, it's interesting in all the studies that are being shown is that people identify this as an issue, but not so many people identify them in themselves. And there are two interpretations of this. One of the interpretations is it's easier to see the problems in others than in oneself. There's also a lot of stigma in this. So that's why getting trained on identifying signs, it's important. I did not know I had burnt out until I had burned out very hard. I mean, it took me a year to recover from my burnout. So it's also important to get awareness on what the signs are.
Yeah, and whether we take time to talk to each other about our well-being. Again, as you say, room for improvement, and maybe this room is a bit of a biased group.
Right, and at the same time, it's great because we're gonna open up the mic at some point of the session so that you can speak about what you guys are doing. So let's look at who do we think should take responsibility, and there's a clear winner. Top managers. So I think that we're all clear here, or a lot of us are clear that this needs to be a top management priority. It needs to come from the top up. At the same time, there can be actions taken from the bottom up as well. And while middle managers have a responsibility, what we can tell you is that middle managers are the most squeezed, so are among the top population burning out and having other mental health challenges. So yes, middle managers are the great vehicle to promote well-being inside an organization, and at the same time, it's important not to squeeze them even farther with further responsibilities without the right support. And finally,
what does your organization do already to promote well-being? So quite a lot of people, managers are checking in with their staff, so that's fantastic to hear. Peer support is also up there. Some paid therapy, and then not so much training for managers, and managers are not such good role models by the looks of things. And I guess it's not just managers who are not such good role models. I think, you know, the pressure that we're all working under at the moment in many different sort of newsroom adjacent jobs means that we don't always practice what we preach. And I must say that I think we're probably good examples of that. We're talking about how to prevent burnout, but when it comes to, running trainings and then making suggestions to people, do we do the same things ourselves?
Well, I have to say that that's part of what we're trying to do, or one of the things I'm trying to pray by what I preach, and at the same time, I understand the struggles, right? So right now, the Self-Investigation is a nonprofit organization that we just started 5 years ago. I'm a social entrepreneur. I have to pay people's salaries, so I do have those pressures, and sometimes I have to work on a Sunday, right? At the same time, to me, it's not so much about having to work on a Sunday or not. It's about how do we carve out enough rest so that we recover from sprint times, so that we don't run from sprint to sprint to sprint. And I think we need to look a lot into how sports people play sports, right? So if you're Usain Bolt and you run 100 meters, you don't run 500-meter runs, you know, all together, right? You cannot run with the same energy a sprint than a marathon. And I think it's a little bit about that. However, we are here to really put the focus, the spotlight on the organizational level, and we came up with a collection of ideas and especially examples from media organizations on what they're doing. And we have 5 steps to share with you. And if anything, step number 1 is know what your problems are. What we're finding when media companies come to us to work with us, sometimes they say, oh, we need to do something about well-being. People are not motivated. I have a high turnover, but I don't know where to start. Well, yes, we can help you. We can tell you what research says and what we're seeing, but we don't you need to know what's happening. And the best way to know about what's happening is to do research. We know as journalists, we do that, right? So the way to do that is through stress risk assessments and audits that can be more thorough or less thorough. Research, for example, could be done by the media company or by the union. Like in Spain, one of the main TV companies, the union has actually created a survey to understand what are the stress levels that the TV company is facing and the employees of the TV company is facing, and they led the research to then make their case in their negotiations with the organization, right? But they can be, you know, surveys about the climate, work climate of the organization. They could also be surveys, simple surveys that you send once in a while to get a feel of how people are feeling. We also see and we know that one of the best ways to mitigate burnout, this is what research shows, is to do regular one-on-one meetings. It's great to hear that many of the people in the room are doing regular one-on-one meetings, check-ins with their team members. If you don't, we suggest you do that. And regular is not the yearly review. It's actually, think of things that are regular. Like in my life, the most regular thing is my period, so that happens once every month, right? So every 2 months, something like that. And we're not talking about meetings here to talk about how are you doing, how are you doing with this project, how about your deadline, blah, blah, blah. This is really meetings to talk about how you're doing, how can I support you, what are your challenges, how is your workload, what do you want to do in order to grow in these organizations, meetings on that note. And because research is important to understand where you're at, if you do any other actions that we're going to suggest moving forward, I think that what's important is it's great that you measure the actions so that you can measure the progress of what you've done. And in this case, you also wanted to highlight something that you lived in Reuters, right, Emma?
Yeah, well, I think at Reuters, there was, and the people are in the room today. So we had a partnership with CIC, which was a sort of hotline for staff, but it wasn't being used, partly because of the stigma that we've talked about. And so this was a kind of top-down and bottom-up initiative to create a peer support network, which then provided a bridge to those professional therapists, and that was built up over many years and resulted in sort of 60 to 70 peer supporters within the organization. But it was something that was being constantly evaluated and sort of, like you say, research being done, statistics being gathered about who was using it, why people were calling, and actually now with the German helpline, it's similar. You know, we're also trying to gather data about, not about individual people, because obviously being anonymous and staying confidential is so important, but collecting the information about what are the issues, what are the topics that people are coming up with. And yeah, like I said, at Reuters, we knew that after a while, the issues were not necessarily what you would expect. It wasn't kind of the PTSD or war correspondent sort of trauma. It was much more mundane issues, may I say. And so when you know that within an organization, you can do something with that. Not just make an argument, but also, you know, what needs tweaking.
Right, and there are a lot of talks in this festival about measuring how our audience interacts with us. This is kind of like the same idea applied to supporting your people. So that's step number one. Once you have the data and you know where to start, although if you don't know where to start and you don't think you have money to do research, step number one, train your managers. Start with your managers. Again, this is not me trying to sell our services, which we do that, but it's actually World Mental Health recommendation on where to start to be most effective with working with promoting mental health at work. Step number two would be understanding that you are not going anywhere without the top leaders involved. And maybe anywhere is a strong word. You might get somewhere, but it's not going to be a long-lasting change, and the actions might fall apart, you know, if those that promoted it leave the organization. And this is currently known for like leadership buy-in. And I think that many of you here were clear about it because you actually said, who needs to support it? Top management, right? But how do you do that? Or what can be done? Or what are other organizations doing about this? Well, it's key that top leaders start talking publicly about the issue, right? And it's not just about us talking about it. We really would like to give the shout out here to Phil Chetwin at AFP. He's a top leader of a big organization, talking about his own struggles, promoting this topic, not only in conferences like this, but also taking actions on including this in the actions, cultural strategic actions being taken by a media organization, his media organization, but there are other examples, right? So we also will show another example of a colleague of ours that it's Gen Z that we'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. But that's an example where if a top leader says in their weekly meeting, in their monthly meeting, you know what, I'm not feeling okay, the world, the way it is, it's also affecting me. That sets the tone for the whole conversation. It doesn't have to be to the whole team, right? Or to the whole organization, 2,000 people organization, but at least, start sharing that example and being a role model on that. It's also about showing that the always-on culture might not be the right strategy, right? So whenever a top leader sends an email saying, hey, Emma, congratulations for working on this story that splashed around the world, and you worked for 20 days nonstop, not even weekends. We're showing an example, or we're sharing an example that, the way to go is to actually work nonstop and work in an unhealthy way, and then Emma might burn out in some ways. So we could also, as top leaders, start sharing examples of healthier practices as well.
I can just say something on that. I mean, it just brings to mind like a really small thing that somebody did at Reuters. A bureau chief went on holiday and they put a proper out-of-office message saying, I'm really on holiday. If you need support, you can call my deputy or, message my deputy, and I'm taking a proper break because that person was working in a big bureau and really needed to have a holiday. And I think it's also about trusting the other people in your team that they can do a job. And unless you have that culture of trust, nobody's ever going to be able to take a break. And also just in terms of talking publicly about the issue, I mean, at Reuters, we did this sort of bottom-up approach with the peer support, but then we realized that the advocacy also had to come from top down in terms of senior people writing or talking publicly. We started writing a sort of internal blog where some quite senior people talked about their own issues, and that really started changing the conversation.
Yeah, and in that sense, if you want to follow the work of somebody that really promoted that work is also Dean Yates, who's no longer at Reuters, but he's a mental health advocate, and he did show, led with this, right? Model vulnerability all the time, right, Emma?
Yeah, so Dean wrote a story for Reuters. It wasn't just an internal blog about his time in a psychiatric ward after PTSD, and that then led to many of the other peer supporters at Reuters saying, okay, I want to tell my story as well. And I wrote a blog, and other people in the organization wrote blogs about many different things. And that really got people talking about it and saying this is okay, because also senior people, also people who've kind of made it are talking about it. And I think that's really important.
And while we are great believers that you can start promoting well-being inside your organization without putting money into it, you're going to have to invest in it in some way. So if it's not money, it's about people's time, right? It is about reallocating the resources that you already have. So for example, freeing up one of your colleagues so that he or she focuses on this, and they can be well-being champions, for example, like the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has a colleague called Dave Seglings, whose role is being a well-being champion and being in meetings and being in projects, promoting well-being and having that in mind. Or it can be like Jean-Marc Mojon in AFP, and his role, he's a journalist, but now he's in charge of safety and mental health inside of AFP, right? But you might have to reallocate resources that you already have, or pay an external entity to do it. Or if you're a nonprofit organization and you get funding, ask your funder to do it. I think that there are great examples here of funders that are promoting well-being and giving extra stipends for well-being. And for example, Civitates here in Europe is one of them. They just opened up a couple of call for proposals that said, we're going to support core funding. In addition to the funding that you ask for, once you're a grantee, you're going to be able to, on a yearly basis, get up to an amount for well-being support, which could be coaching, could be therapy, could be training, it could be many, many different types of things, right? And Luminate did something like that during the pandemic, supporting their well-being, their grantees with well-being stipends. Fred Foundation supports the Mental Health in Journalism Summit and also is very proactive in supporting the well-being of their grantees. And I'm sure there are many, many other examples, but that's just to give you a few names. So let us tell you about a leader that we really like as an example to showcase that it is possible.
Yeah, so last year, the Self-Investigation ran a 6-month program for leaders of fact-checking organizations around the world, and Jency Jacob was one of those from India, from Boom Fact Check. And I mean, he's somebody who, I guess, already came to the program with a commitment to this issue. But, he's really changed the culture at his organization, maybe partly due to working with us, but I think he was very committed to it already. And he came up with various very practical steps for his team. So one, in India, everything happens on WhatsApp. So it's kind of like Slack and email and everything all together. And so one thing is they introduce trigger warnings on their WhatsApp newsroom group. They also, tried to be strict about not messaging out of hours. And Jency himself doesn't like having meetings after lunch, so he really made that a kind of no meeting zone so that people would really rest and recuperate. That's just a few of his policies.
And I think that's also understandable that if you are a newsroom dealing with potentially traumatic content, then it's important to have things like this, like have trigger warnings if you're sending some sort of, potentially triggering images, for example, on WhatsApp, on videos, or on any other channels. He also made it of a working culture to show that it's okay not to be okay, right? And other things that he led into the rest of the middle management of his organization that can help kind of like take the things down. At the same time, one thing that he highlighted, right, is at key times, they did workshops with counselors and one-time session paid by a company. And in here, we're talking a lot about prevention, but of course, it's important to also provide psychological support or other type of support when it's needed, right? And some organizations, for example, have a company doctor, like AFP has one, BBC has one. It tends to be big broadcasting or corporations or big media companies. But maybe you cannot afford a company doctor that people can go to, but you can afford any other type of support that we're going to mention in a second. So these might be, some ideas, and you're thinking, yeah, my top leader is not like Gen Z. So how do we get more Gen Zs in media newsrooms?
Yeah, well, I think we talk about this a lot because I would count myself as coming from the suck it up generation. I think when I went into journalism, well, it was the price you paid, that you worked long hours, and we do it because we love it. Ultimately, we have to remember that we're all in this job because fundamentally it's a great, exciting opportunity. So we've thought of a few tips to how to convince your leaders, and obviously one of them is find the right people in the organization at a senior level who might have a personal interest. Perhaps even if they don't have a work interest, maybe in their family they've had some experience with mental health challenges. Show them the research, so it's not just young people. Even if from the older generation they might think this is a snowflake issue, I think the data very much shows that this does not just affect young people. Present the business case. So I've already sort of laid that out in my little visual. Who benefits?
And there's a lot of research on this. And again, if you need research, we're showing some. There's more research in all the resources that we produce. My recommendation would be to go to big top consulting firms. So McKinsey has a lot of research on this. Boston Consulting Group has research that can help you make the case. Deloitte made a study in the UK showing how if you invest £1 in mental health awareness and mental health prevention, it would be a return of £5 because you're mitigating sick leaves, you're mitigating turnover, because you're motivating employees. So there are figures that show that this is key for the business.
And for better journalism.
Of course.
Then, of course, show others that are doing it. So we've given you some examples today, especially the competition. I think often that's a very powerful argument.
Yes, like, oh, AFP is doing this. We're Reuters, AFP is doing this. Or, oh, AFP is doing, or like another organization, right? It's always like The Guardian is doing this. This type of things is always helpful. Or the other competition in your country as well.
Yeah, I've already discussed this. Why do it? Who benefits? Everybody benefits, but, especially journalism benefits and our society by extension. And then sort of on the downside, telling cautionary tales, examples of bad practice and journalists quitting. And, there's been some really upsetting cases as well of journalist suicides in the last few years. Then building alliances of advocates. And just to go back to the example of the peer support network at Reuters, that was people in the organization who cared about this at a grassroots level, but kind of building alliances with managers, people like Mike Christie, who's in the room today, I'm delighted to see, but also, building alliances also across the industry, like you've been doing, Mar.
Right, and in that case, let me just make the plug again, Mental Health in Journalism Summit, October 8th to 10th. That's why the summit is existing, is so that we all meet in a place online and we share best practices, learn from each other, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time about this. So step 1 was research, like know what the problems are. Step 2 is top leadership buy-in. Step 3, I've been repeating it already, so I gave a little bit of a spoiler, but you probably need to train your managers as a first course of action. Because one of the key issues for high-performing teams is to have psychological safety. And this is not me saying it. Google did a great research on high-performing teams called Project Aristotle, and that's what they found. So psychological safety, getting people to feel free to speak up and to share challenges, and also speak up and say, hey, we should do this differently, is key for organizations. And especially at a time like this, where actually managers, especially middle managers, are that point, are our first point of entry to our struggles, right? And this is a recent statistic from Modern Health, which is 60% of managers, not just media managers, in the workforce in general, say they are expected to provide emotional well-being support without the right tools to do so. So if you don't want this to escalate, start there by training managers or providing them with coaching so that they can do it, by also supporting well-being committees inside your organization. For example, the Washington Post has a well-being committee. Well-being champions, we already discussed this, like the CBC, Dave Seglins, or Jean-Marc at AFP. Also promoting a culture of feedback and celebrating success. And you're big on this, Emma.
Yeah, I think we as journalists are very critical people, and as we maybe go through our careers, we turn from idealists into cynics. And I think that means that we often don't focus on the positive, also the positive of our job, why we do it in the first place, what a privilege it is to be a journalist, but also on the positive of what people are doing in our teams and giving positive feedback as well as just kind of criticizing.
Yes, and it can also be as simple as promoting like a monthly team get-together, right? That can happen online as well. But places where we don't have to join and say what we're doing, but how we're feeling. And this is key, especially in these times where with so much uncertainty, with so much news going on that affect our lives. It's a very similar situation than the pandemic. It's less visible because we're not wearing masks and we're not all at home. And then support, step number 4 is support has to be ongoing. So if you devise a working plan on how to promote well-being inside your organization, you need to understand that, yes, it's great to do one workshop, but how am I going to bring this beyond that one workshop or beyond that one intervention? And there are many examples here. Companies that can afford it can use employee assistance programs that can support, can have like helplines that provide 24-hour support by chat or therapy or other types of activities. But it's also important to provide other external support, such as paid therapy, as we mentioned this, right? And we also wanted to make a point about internal policies, written policies and guidelines. It's key, especially in topics like the ones that you've seen on the screen, online harassment, trauma and vicarious trauma, and the right to disconnect, because our culture in journalism is a lot about the always-on culture, and that is really making a lot of journalists being burnt out or having mental health challenges because they don't have enough rest space to be able to recover and recharge. And then peer support. You mentioned, Emma, what you've done at Reuters in the peer support program. You also have the helpline. So there are different interventions in different ways, right? I don't know if you'd like to add anything on this.
I mean, I think just to say that peer support happens in many organizations and on an informal basis. Everybody knows that there's somebody in their organization who's the person that everybody goes to. And I think the thing about having a more formal peer support network is that it recognizes that informal work, that informal care work. Let's be honest, it often is the women in the organization that provide this. And I think recognizing that and then supporting those peers is also essential.
So just to finish, step number 5, we are expert communicators in the media, right? Well, we tend not to communicate very well what we do internally. So don't forget to communicate. Values, policies, and resources protecting the staff's mental health need to be communicated regularly. And not only, but especially when times are rough. Right now, in places like the US, people are really struggling, like going to the office every day. What have you done, for example, if anybody from the US is here or in the audience, to communicate your staff what support is there for them, right? And we really wanted to say that because we're finding a lot of newsrooms that have things, offers, activities, support, and their employees don't know about them, right? So it's a waste here. But we're running out of time. We have a few minutes left. We didn't want to be just the only ones sharing some solutions. We wanted to open up the mic, not only to questions, but most importantly, we wanted to open it up to see if anybody else wants to share something that you are doing that you'd like the others to know about. Just know that this is being recorded and it's going to be then posted online. So just have that in mind.
I'm Lina Kush from National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. Yeah, we participated at the Mental Health and Journalism Summit. Thank you for this opportunity. And maybe our experience is not relevant to peaceful time, but because we are in a stress situation during last 3 years. But I think it's relevant advice to for media manager to communicate with the team every time. And in our culture, unfortunately, the best journalist is who is online 24/7 and who forgot about the family, about personal needs. And it's a mission, not a work, and so on. So it's important for media, for newsroom to have tradition to stop after successful, maybe after successful task, and revise, reflect, but not to have the new task to execute immediately. Yeah, it works for every time. And to develop different scenarios for the future. It's very important for newsrooms. Even the worst scenario or the best scenarios, but it's important to develop these scenarios and communicate with the team that we have a plan for every situation. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Hi, since the helpline was mentioned a couple of times, I just wanted to explain what it is and how it works. It's not set up by a specific organization. The helpline was set up by the German Association of Investigative Journalists, and it's a telephone hotline that every journalist in Germany can call. It's peer support that we provide. So it's not professional psychologists on the phone, but journalists who were trained in psychological first aid, active listening techniques, and stuff like that. And the reason is that we want to provide help by people who can relate to the problems that journalists have. And yeah, we started a year ago, and it's relatively easy to set up. Of course, funding is always an issue, but if you want to know more how to set up your own helpline, you can reach out to me. We have cards and contact information. Yeah, just reach out. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And since we're running out of time, I also want to open up the microphone for any questions. Just know that this is the summary of the 5 steps that we've given. You can go back into the recording to rewatch some of the details that we went into. And we're opening up to questions. Maybe we'll have time for 1 or 2, and then we're happy to talk more. And while we go over a question, happy for you to go into Menti again if you want. I took out the QR code to avoid the problem before, and maybe you can answer the questions there so that we get a last photo of what can be done after you've heard all these ideas. So menti.com, if you can go and put out this code, 53337438.
Yeah, just to say that at whatever level you are in your organization, wherever you are, I think there's something that everybody can do. I think even though we feel like the responsibility lies often with managers, and other people might feel powerless, I think there's lots of things that you can do at different levels and in different places.
Actually, recently you were working with a media organization that did a breakfast, would you like, or a top lunch?
Yeah, I mean, this was just organized by a journalist in a media organization. She organized a kind of, actually it was cake, it was in Germany, so sort of coffee and cake in the afternoon, but to talk about the issue. And she's a journalist, you know, with no particular power and no particular budget, but she got her colleagues around the table having an open discussion, and that was, you know, that can be more powerful than anything else.
Okay, so any questions? No, we need to finish here. So if you have any questions, sorry for the people online. If you have any questions, I'll put up our contact in a second. For the people here, we can continue the conversation in this lovely patio. Let me just wrap up by sharing the results here. What action can you take? As Emma said, anybody can start doing something about it. And a lot of people thought speaking up about the issue is number one issue. Being a good role model, and we're also seeing some other ideas around supporting colleagues, trainings, etc. How do you feel about this workshop? More confident, empowered, safe, aware, inspired? This is great that these are the top words that come up out of this, so thank you. And if you need more support, you can find us at theselfinvestigation.com. Or let me just say, put up this up here, so you have more of our info and our details. Follow us on social media. Most importantly, come to the summit. You can access it for free, although if you can pay a ticket and you can invest in this, it's also helpful for us to do our work. Finally, for the people in the room, if you want one of our cards with our key message, you are more important than your work. We need to be well in order to be good journalists. As we say in the self-investigation, the future of journalism needs mentally healthy journalists. Thank you.